Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Thrive in China Roundtable, where we're going to be looking at how to scale your China business. Now, I actually didn't have the intention to do this topic, but last week I was at a conference in London where everybody in the breakout session was so impressed by the directness of this presentation that many wanted me to do it again so that they could actually show it to their board of directors and the decision makers within their organizations, hence why we're doing this topic this week. So today we're going to be talking about how to scale your China business. We're going to be looking at the frustrations that you're currently encountering. And I'm going to be providing you a 15-point action plan that you can utilize in order to actually start thinking about how to grow the business, how to improve the efficiency within your organization, and make sure that you make more money ultimately. So to start off with today's presentation, use your chat boxes. I would love to know what everybody's goals and objectives for China are. Now, I've only listed one item, and I've listed one item because this is what my goal and objective is for China, which is ultimately to make money. And I think that's ultimately what everybody's goal is in China. We are there to make money. But more importantly, we are there to consistently make more money. What we don't want to have as an SME or as a startup or as an entrepreneur is that we have a roller coaster ride of revenue, profit, cost, etc. What we want to do is build momentum, maintain consistency so that ultimately revenue goes up, cost plateaus, remains the same if at all possible, or it increases slightly with your revenue, and ultimately you are making more and more money. Okay, now I'm very brash. This is my one goal. This is my one objective. And if I would think about all of the clients that I have or companies that I'm assisting right now, this is probably at the top of everybody's list. Now, you might have other ambitions for China as well. But for today's point and for today's topic, what we are really trying to achieve is to make more money. Now, in the last 3 years, I guess since the pandemic started, but ultimately I've been seeing these frustrations as well previously, but they've been highlighted more in the last 3 years. I want to talk a little bit about the frustrations and obstacles that are occurring right now within organizations. And I'm highlighting it because these frustrations are actually the deterrents and obstacles that are occurring that are preventing people from scaling up, preventing companies from actually scaling up. Now, you will find that a lot of these issues are psychological. I'm not a therapist. I can't help you with these, but I do see these issues internally within the organizations. So the first one being borders are shut. Okay, it's an excuse I hear daily. I can't do anything in China because the borders in China are shut. I can only scale up my business. I can only start my business. I can only hire people if the borders are opened and I can physically get on the ground there. This is psychological, right? I have had probably my biggest year so far in terms of companies investing in China in 2021. Just to say that there are companies who are not using this as an excuse to be able to enter China and scale up in China. So if you're using this as a point of not wanting to scale up, not wanting to push forward, that's your decision. But I want to highlight today that this should not be an excuse, because I have seen companies be able to enter, implement, and scale within a 12-month timeframe all throughout 2021, which has been so enlifting for me and makes me so happy, and obviously depresses me now since the Shanghai lockdowns, because it's preventing people from being able to do that. But the borders should not be an excuse. The Shanghai lockdowns, that was a valid excuse. There were supply chain issues, etc. But the borders being shut should not. And in addition to that, with the regulations getting easier, in that the quarantine regulations are getting lower, there's less and less excuse for people to say that if they really want, they can go. They can really go. You just have to spend time there. Another big issue, especially with companies that have multiple decision makers, is the fact that there is zero alignment amongst the decision makers on how to achieve the goals and objectives. So we all have the same goal. We want to make money in China, but how do we execute our strategy to achieve that goal and that objective? This is where there's zero alignment. One board of director will say we have to do X, Y, Z. Another board of director will say, nope, I disagree. We have to do A, B, C. Another board of director will say, actually, I don't want to make a decision regarding China. And then the folks sitting in China have no idea what to do and how to execute. Getting everybody on the same page and on the same wavelength in terms of how to execute a plan is fundamental and critical. If you cannot get people aligned about how to execute, how do you want your service providers? How do you want your team members? How do you want your partners to be able to achieve that goal if you yourself don't know what you're doing or how you want to do it, and you change your mind every other day? So getting this alignment is fundamental and is critical. The other is the fear of scaling up. A lot of people say, I like the status quo. The status quo is easy. I've delegated all the work to people on the ground. I actually don't have to make decisions. We like the status quo. We're growing, but we're incrementally growing. Some will say, actually, we're just content with how everything is going. That's absolutely fine. That's an internal decision. But I do know that there are entrepreneurs, there are managing directors, there are board of directors that have a fear of scaling up because it requires capital investment, it requires human resources, without certainty on a return on investment and when that might happen. And they have a fear of what happens if we make a mistake and we're not on the ground to fix it. So I hope you're starting to see that all of these frustrations are actually intertwined one with the other. But there is this fear, this tendency of people not really wanting to really push and execute and scale up. The other is very simply, and it's not psychological, it's the simple fact that we might not have the financial resources to make the commitment to scale up. Already, you are requiring a certain amount of financial capital to enter the Chinese market, set up the infrastructure, set up the foundation, but it doesn't end there. You still need capital to scale up and to grow. It's not that you are going to actually obtain revenue straight away that's just going to sustain the business, because when you scale up, you have to do more things, maybe more marketing initiatives. You might have to spend more on KOLs. You might have to spend more on hiring additional people for the team. Scaling up requires enlarging your foundation. And very simply, you might not have capital to do that. Now, if you don't have the capital to do that, then now is not the right time to scale up, because you really do need this financial backing to support the business. But then it's something factual. You either have it or you don't have it. The next one is having no idea on how to move from strategy to execution. And this is where it gets interesting, because there are thousands of different service providers on the ground that can support you from going strategy to execution, i.e. they are on the ground to actually execute your project. The dilemma in China is being able to trust service providers, trying to see the value that they're going to add. And there are good ones and there are bad ones. I'm not going to say anything. All service providers, we are it's a human business. You either like them, you don't like them, you like what they're offering, you don't like what they're offering. It's totally up to you. But this is where I would say do your benchmarking. If you are looking, I do it because I see Jean-Paul on here. If you're looking for TPs, interview as many TPs as possible to figure out who's the best one for you, or use multiple, right? But it's just to say there are, again, thousands of providers on the ground who can support your business and push you forward to that execution stage. It's always about benchmarking, knowing who's the right one for you. Are they at the right price range for you? And do they provide that additional value add? There's one more I want to add here because I think it's critical, and it stems from the last one, which was strategy to execution. The other one is human resources. Going into the Chinese market is not something where you should just be delegating the work to providers and making the assumption that these providers are going to make money for you. You need to internally have a team of people, or at least one person, who's going to be in charge of the China jurisdiction, head of China, whatever you want to call them, and who's going to be responsible for collaborating with and coordinating with the partners that you have on the ground. If you don't have that internal human resource infrastructure, you're not going to get anywhere. You need somebody full-time, if not a team of people full-time, that are going to pay attention to the business and make sure that you pivot and move your business in all the directions possible so that you don't get held up and you don't hit roadblocks and obstacles along the way. So if I were to add another one, it would be human resources. If you guys want to share what other frustrations you've seen from clients or what you yourself are feeling, add it into the chat box. I'm happy to add additional slides. So just to create a bit of foundation, again, before I start talking about scaling up in China, because it all stems with the foundation that you have. So how might you have started off in China? The option one is direct sales, meaning that you have an entity in the UK, in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in Germany, wherever. And from that entity, you are selling your products into China. Now, just to highlight, this presentation is very much focused on sales into China, but a lot of what I'm saying are theories that can be implemented, whether you're sourcing in China or whether you're offering services in China, right? So the first one is direct sales. You either have your own website abroad and you're starting to attract Chinese customers to it, and you're selling through that e-commerce website. The other is developing a cross-border e-commerce business model in China, where, again, you're outsourcing to TPs on the ground who are supporting your business. You've got flagship stores on JD.com, on Tmall, on a variety of other platforms, and you're doing cross-border e-commerce. Or you're doing direct B2B sales with customers, and you're generating those customers from your head office, right? So you don't have anybody on the ground that is actually building up the customer list, okay? Now, what you will find is that from an e-commerce perspective, you still need people in your supply chain to support the business. Also for B2B, you need logistical providers, you might need warehousing, you might need TPs for the cross-border e-commerce, you might need customer service reps that speak Chinese to cater to those Chinese customers. So even if you're doing direct sales, you still need to have a support group. I call it an ecosystem of individuals that are helping you to kick off the supply chain, okay? Option two is using trade intermediaries. And this can be sales reps, it can be distributors, it can be media agencies, it can be TP partners, it can be logistical providers, and the list goes on. So by trade intermediaries, it's actually people on the ground who are facilitating the trade transaction for you to be able to sell into China, okay? And again, when you're utilizing these intermediaries, you have to vet them. You have to understand whether they're the right partners for you. You might want to have multiple partners, so multiple distributors, multiple sales rep based on a regional aspect to China. You might want to have I have a client who uses multiple TPs because it depends on the actual product and brand that they're bringing in. They feel that with certain brand types, certain TPs work better, other brand types, other TPs work better. You have to evaluate that internally. What is the best trade intermediary that can assist you? And all of this means you don't have an entity on the ground. You're using these intermediaries to support your business. I see that Matt is on here. In the case of service providers, it could very well be that you need referral partners that are going to refer you clients on the ground, right? So you can also add referral partners into this description in terms of intermediaries who are going to bring you clients as well. The next option is using licensees. Now, I don't have much to say on that, but again, it's not a direct trade transaction. You're using licensees for other reasons. And again, it's a matter of vetting those types of partners. Are they the right partners? Are they delivering what they say? I have actually one potential client right now who has been brokering a licensing agreement for the last 3 years with a partner in Beijing, and it just has not gone anywhere. And for her, it's now 3 years on, and she actually wants to exit the market because she's so fed up. But the issue is she's never benchmarked anybody else. She doesn't know who's actually out there in the market. So using licensees is another option. It's another foundation. Using franchisees is also another option. This is really geared more towards, restaurant franchisees. That's more what I know in terms of the restaurant side. Then, of course, you can use employer of record service, which is another foundation where ultimately you hire people on the ground through a third party. It means that these people are actually properly employed, but they're working for you full time. Again, either as sales agents or as sales intermediaries or as business development managers to really push and scale up the business. But it just means that instead of outsourcing to a company or delegating things to a company, you're delegating it to an individual that actually you would like to hire yourself, but you don't want to commit to the market in terms of establishing an entity. And option 6 is using Hong Kong. Now, I highlight Hong Kong because, and I don't always recommend Hong Kong, not really anymore, when it just caters to China. Hong Kong is great, it's fantastic, but it's expensive to set up a company there and manage it and administer it. So why would I recommend Hong Kong, and why is Hong Kong utilized as a foundation? For a lot of reasons. But what I hope it's ultimately used for is as an Asian sales hub, meaning that you have actually an ambition, not just to sell into China, but you also have an ambition to sell into, I don't know, Japan, Korea, Australia, Taiwan. You might want to be transacting with Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and you're using Hong Kong as that regional hub that's going to cater to the Asian market. So Hong Kong has to have additional value besides just being an intermediary with China, okay? Otherwise, you're spending an arm and a leg to maintain it, administer it. There has to be other reasons. You might also be using Hong Kong because you have multiple investors and you want that investor hub to be in Hong Kong. And it's more than a financial hub versus actually a trading hub, okay? Could very well be. But these are, for me, the 6 foundational options that companies have, okay? This is just a supply chain diagram to show you how Hong Kong can be utilized for other APAC regions as well, just besides China, okay? So that's the foundation. That's you've probably used one, if not multiple of those options to create your foundation. Or you might have said, you know what, guys, I'm going to go straight in the market. I'm going to make the commitment. I'm going to set up my own entity, and I'm going to utilize my own entity to trade. So I'm not using intermediaries. I'm not doing any of that. Okay, that's option 7, which is also possible, but doesn't happen so often nowadays where people are just gung-ho and say, I'm going to set something up in China. Usually they'll use one of these 6 options first before they actually take that next step. So how do you scale up in China? Right? That's the key question of today, based on the foundations that I've actually spoken about. All right. Now, for me, I think that every company, when they're developing a China strategy, should create a phased approach to China. They should do things in incremental steps. Okay. And you might have phase 1, which lasts 2-3 years, or lasts only 2 months. You might have phase 2, which lasts, again, 2 years, or because of the growth and how you're scaling up, also only lasts 2 months. But as you're creating this phased approach, you're going to have trigger points, questions that you should be raising in your head about when do we move to the next stage. Now, the questions to raise should be, what is my volume of business that I have reached so far? And part of that is, what is the value of business that you have achieved so far? Okay, so when you are selling into China, what's the quantity that you're actually selling? What's the value that you're actually selling? Okay, the two have to go hand in hand. Ultimately, you should also be looking at what your goal and objective is and putting a time frame on that. Now, what a lot of people tend to do is say, okay, it's 2022 right now. By end of 2025, I want to hit a revenue of 10 million US dollars. Okay, now that's great. That's all well and good. But do you have supporting data to back up that goal and objective? Why have you taken the number 10 million? Okay, there has to be a reason behind that. For me, data is fundamental, and data, market research data, is something that should not be just done once at the market entry phase. It should be something that is continuously done so that you are constantly updating your goals and objectives based on circumstances. For example, who would have thought there was going to be a pandemic? And who thought that in 2022, there was going to be 2 months of zero activity in China with the lockdowns, right? You've got to be able to pivot these goals and objectives based on current circumstances, based on research. Then you've got to continuously ask yourself, what is my commitment level to the Chinese market? I have this one client, like I mentioned, who's been so fascinated by China for 3 years, thought she had the best partner, but in the end of the day, it didn't work out, right? And now she's frustrated and now she wants to leave. So you've got to continuously also analyze what is your commitment level to the market. The next one is, what are your financial resources to scale up? Like I said, if you don't have the capital to scale, then you're going to remain at this phase for quite a while until you do have that capital to scale up. Okay, so if you're creating this phased approach, right, you have to know that as you are moving and scaling up and going from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4, to do that jump, you need capital to make that jump. And you have to decide, are we only going to make that jump based on the money we achieve, and hence we're going to keep the money in China to then scale up? Or do we need an additional capital from our HQ or from other investors? So that's a continuous question you should be asking yourself. The next is, what are your HR resources to scale up? Do you need more people on the ground to support the scaling up? As you go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4, do you have to add more people into your headcount? Or do you need to add intermediaries into your supply chain, i.e. have multiple TPs, have multiple logistics partners, have multiple media agencies, have multiple lawyers, right? You got to think how you're going to do it. And of course, you always have options. You can add headcount or you can outsource. The next is, what is your appetite for risk? I can't answer that. Everybody's risk level is different. Okay, some people are true risk takers, true visionaries in terms of how they want to achieve their goals and objectives. You have to evaluate that internally. And again, this is where there might be zero alignment, because you might have some board of directors say, I have zero risk, zero appetite for risk, and others who say, no, I'm ready to make that risk for China. I will say, you can only determine the risk that you want to take based on the data that you have that's going to support you. If the data states that actually there's very little opportunity in China, then of course, why should you take the risk? If the data says, hell no, there's a hell of a lot of opportunity for you, and all the providers are telling you there's a hell of a lot of opportunity, then you need to take that risk, right? You've got to listen to your ecosystem and listen to the data. The next is, are your partners super partners? Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I made in my market entry to China was that in the first 5 years of operating, I did not want to rock the boat, meaning that I was so scared. I didn't want to take the risk of changing providers, changing team members. I was so worried that if I changed anything in this system, I was going to lose clients, I was going to lose everything. That was a true mistake for me because I couldn't scale up. You've got to evaluate your partners, your team members, and understand, are they really super partners? Can they really do everything to meet your expectations? Or actually, are they just okay? Or actually, are they horrible, right? You've got to evaluate that. And you've got to continuously evaluate that, and you've got to continuously benchmark that. And you've got to have, again, the appetite for risk to change, to let people go if they're rubbish, to let partners go if they're rubbish. The next thing is, have you plateaued on your current sales channels? All right, a lot of you might be going in with cross-border e-commerce. You might have a flagship store on Tmall, and sales has kind of plateaued because you're not evaluating other sales channels. Have you thought about going on JD? Have you thought about going on other platforms to support the business? Alternatively, have you thought about going offline? The next is, are you looking to increase your product portfolio, i.e., are you increasing your SKUs? Now, why do I say this? Because again, in the market entry phase, you might have had the mindset of, I'm only going to bring in 2 to 3 products where the data tells me it's going to be successful. And then you don't change that. You don't change the status quo. At the conference last week, there were a lot of key words that were thrown out that I want to throw out in today's presentation, which is innovation, strategic innovation, knowing your client's needs. If you keep the status quo of only keeping 2 or 3 products on the platforms and not expanding on that, you're not innovating. Why should consumers be interested in you? Again, it takes a lot of effort to bring in new products, which is why the financial resources aspect is key. But you've got to continuously think about scaling up. So new sales channels, new product portfolio. I don't know if I added it here. Let's look on the next slide, but I was going to add in also new regions. If you say I'm going to start off in Shanghai, offline, why not go to Chengdu or Chongqing, right? Also, when you're doing cross-border e-commerce or you're doing online sales, are you evaluating where your consumers are coming from? Are the majority of consumers based on the East Coast? And if so, why? Why aren't you getting more consumers going to your flagship store from the West Coast, from inland China, right? So you've got to evaluate the regional aspect as well. The other is, are you looking to sell offline? Do you need to do product registrations? Because that takes time. If you're doing cross-border e-commerce, you don't have to do product registrations. But if you want to start selling domestically, then you have to think about that ahead of time. I have one client, and that's part of my case study list, who was launching a new brand into China without realizing that for the ingredients that were in his brand, he needed to do a specific product registration. So now can't launch in 2022 because they're in the process of doing the product registration, right? Are clients in China saying that they want to receive fapiaos in your company name? If you don't know about the invoicing system in China, if your clients are starting to say, we want to transact with you locally and domestically, that is a trigger now for you because it's a different business model that you have to create. Fapiaos are the official invoices that you obtain from the tax bureaus. So you have to evaluate that. Listen to your customers and their needs and what are they saying to you. The other thing is, are you being asked by partners and clients for local representation? Meaning, are they sick and tired of the time zone differences? Are they sick and tired of waiting and getting responses from you? China moves fast. People want responses quickly. If you can't cater to that, you are not going to be able to scale up. So think about the customer service side and think about local representation at some point. Now, these are 13 questions to raise internally. There's a whole bunch more. I cannot put all of it here. I'm trying to give you a picture of how you should be evaluating your business on a day-to-day basis, month-to-month basis, on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis. Okay, but these are questions that should be ringing in your ears constantly. And these should be your triggers of how to go from phase to phase. Now, what's the action plan? Because I think in the end of the day, what we want to do is to actually know what we have to evaluate in the business, right? What is my homework? Now, again, I created a 15-point action plan. You might find this a lot of homework. It is a lot of homework, which is why, again, I say, evaluate your human resources. Because you will need somebody or a team of people to take these actions and actually implement and execute them. Okay. Now, all of these actions can be done from your HQ. All of this does not mean you have to have an entity in China. Okay, we're talking about how to scale your China business. So although some of the slides might reference entities and whatnot, please don't think of it in that way. It's just generally what you should be thinking about for your China business, whether you're managing that from your HQ or whether you actually have an entity on the ground. The first is look at your China numbers, okay? Which means if you have an entity in China and you're using that entity to transact with, no problem, you've got China numbers. Just make sure you've got a good accounting system and you've got good finance people who are taking care of it. If you don't have an entity in China, do you have a separate P&L for China in your HQ? Now, I was talking to a very large brand last Tuesday where I could see their eyes jump. And she actually said in the Q&A, I've been begging my finance department to keep a proper China P&L. And I said, this is critical. You have to keep a separate P&L in your HQ. And don't forget, if you've got a team of people that are full-time on China, but sitting in your HQ, they should be part of this P&L. All of the costs, whether they are generated in your HQ or whether they're generated in China, should be in this separate China P&L. The same that if you have an entity in China, but actually you're transacting direct from your HQ, you need a consolidated China P&L to truly understand the numbers. I don't know how people can make decisions about scaling up in China without looking at their financial figures. It's impossible, right? You have to evaluate and analyze that. So here's a bit of a checklist. And again, a lot of this might be geared more to you having an entity in China, but just generally speaking, are you checking the numbers? Now, I'm going to make it even more intense. Are you checking it daily? Are you checking it weekly? Or are you just checking it monthly? Because if you are checking it monthly, it means that you are checking it 2 weeks after the month ends. You have to analyze what numbers you actually should be checking daily, what numbers you should be checking weekly, what numbers you should be checking monthly, and put deadlines so that you have the ability to make decisions and pivot the business faster. Are you receiving your financial management reports for China monthly? Are you receiving them in English? That's if you have an entity in China. Do you proactively sit with your finance team to discuss each line item? Or are you just getting the reports and because you're not a finance person, you're a salesperson, you just look at revenue and nothing else? Somebody has to analyze this entire P&L. You have to sit with the finance team. You have to sit with various departments to analyze every line item so you can make decisions on the next step. And this is where companies get lazy. This is where you have to be extremely proactive to get that done. And you've got to understand every line item. And don't hesitate to say, actually, you know what? There's revenue. Revenue is only one item. I need this to be broken down into product type. Or I need costs to be broken down into actual shipping, warehousing, whatever else, pick and pack. Because I really need to understand my profit margins for every product, not just about my China business. Okay, you've got to go into the details. The next is if you've got to analyze it. So do you sit with the finance team? Do you sit with the sales team? Do you sit with the marketing team to actually analyze what is happening in the actual current period so that you can make decisions to pivot the business or not pivot the business, to make decisions on growing, expanding, cutting back, right? You should not just be maintaining the status quo. You've got to constantly pivot and move and change and decide what you're going to do. And if you realize that somebody is not a good staff member, fire them. If you realize a partner after 2 consecutive months has not been hitting the targets, you get rid of them. Got to make these decisions quick. The next is focus, right? If you have the finance report, the financial data at your fingertips, you can focus on specific line items that will then push you to focus on that specific strategy, right? Your strategy should be a whole China strategy, but it also should be broken down into different aspects. A marketing strategy, a sales strategy, a supply chain strategy, right? You have to look at all of these different aspects and break that down. And living in China and considering the last 3 years, what has happened, you have to pivot your business monthly. Some clients of mine are actually pivoting daily. Okay. Now, the big question is, what do I focus on, right? There's so much to focus on, and I'm going to give you the 15 points of what to focus on. You can't do this all at the same time, right? It's impossible to place so much brain power on so many different things. But let me tell you what you need. Let me tell you what I would recommend doing to really be able to focus on a proper strategy for your business. So the first one is strive for incremental growth. Like I said earlier, you might say by the end of 2025, I want to make 10 million US dollars in revenue. I mean, that's huge. For me, that's an overwhelming amount. For some of you, that might not seem very large, but if you're starting from zero revenue, and by the end of 2025, you got to hit 10 million US dollars in revenue, I'm overwhelmed, right? Now, you should have this ultimate goal in your mind. It should be, a future vision of what you want to achieve, but you need to break that down into digestible information. How do you break it down? There are a number of ways, but the simplest way is saying, all right, if by the end of 2025, I have to reach 10 million US dollars in revenue, let's break that down into what I have to achieve on a monthly basis to hit that 10 million. Just do simple math. Break that 10 million into 36 months. Then break that 36 months down into what do I have to achieve weekly? Then very simply break that down into what do I have to achieve daily? Now, if you're selling into China, especially through e-commerce, you will have daily stats. So that will give you some insight in what you should be achieving on a daily basis. But if you break those numbers down, they become more digestible. And it helps you to really analyze on a daily, on a weekly basis, whether you're going to hit that target, whether you have to pivot, whether you have to change the target to something that's more reasonable, etc. But break down your ultimate number into something that's digestible. The second one is focus on strategic innovation. That's what the Chinese consumers want. I mean, there are virtual KOLs out there now, guys. Virtual KOLs. Objects that actually look like people, and you would not even know that they're not people, who are selling your products. That's how advanced China is. The Chinese consumers want to experience things. There was a stat last Tuesday that I found phenomenal, and I want to bring it up today. There was a market research study done on what was the #1 hobby for Chinese people. 75% of the people that were interviewed chose shopping as their #1 hobby. Now, I wouldn't even know that shopping would come into a hobby list in any case, because that's not my mindset and my mentality, but in China, it is. And when they go shopping, they want to experience something that is unique and that is different. Okay? So you need to create an environment around your brand, around your products that's innovative. And you need to have a strategy around how you're going to bring more products in, how your products are going to evolve, how your packaging might evolve, right? You have to think about all of these things to make sure that you don't plateau, but that you constantly scale up and you're constantly attracting not only new consumers or new customers, but also that you're attracting recurring customers, right? So strategic innovation is a must. Excuse me. And the question is, when do you implement that? And what phases? The next is creating an incredible team. That took me a really long time to do. It took me 5 years. But now I have a lean management team. I have a stable-ish, and I use the word stable-ish team in the sense that I have much less turnover now than I did in the past. You have to evaluate people consistently and constantly to make sure that you always have a team of people that are taking your vision and are ready to grow it. I also want to add here a concept that I truly believe in, which is the Kaizen concept. It's a Japanese concept. where ultimately you are continuously striving for better. Your company in China should be continuously striving for efficiency. It should be continuously striving for improving its internal processes. It should be continuously striving to create a solid team of people that also individually want to strive for Kaizen. Okay, you've got to have everybody on board within your team. Again, this is not something that's easy to do. It's something that's a process, but you have to have an incredible team, an incredible ecosystem of partners as well. You need to constantly identify what's not working. Okay, I do that on a weekly basis. I analyze. I do a lot of my job as a managing director is to look internally within my operations and make sure that I'm always striving for better. And I have to analyze what is working and what is not working within my organization. Okay. Again, something that's not easy to do, but you have to consistently identify. And if something is not working once and then it doesn't work a second time, you've got to change that. Absolutely. But already by the first time, you've got to think about how to change the processes. And this leads me then to fine-tuning your processes. Most companies in China, and I'm talking about now entrepreneurs, small, medium-sized companies, they do not create operational guidelines within their organizations. They do not create system processes. System processes are fundamental pieces of documents. They are the foundation of when you hire people or when you are outsourcing to partners, you give them your operational guidelines and they should tell you whether they agree to it or not. And if they don't agree to it, understand why, because that might give you ideas on how to improve it. Or ultimately, if they're just stubborn and they don't want to follow it, it means they're not the right people or partners to collaborate with. But you should have system processes for your financial team, for your marketing team, for your sales team, for your supply chain team. You should have management directives that are in place in terms of what types of power of authority management has, etc. You need to have these system processes in place. And be willing to adapt them, okay? They are not the Bible. They're not fixed in stone. They are adaptable and should be adapted consistently. And the next is waste not, want not. So actually, I heard this again as a Q&A last week, what I want to bring up today is a lot of companies focus on three numbers. They focus on revenue, they focus on cost, and they focus on net profit. And the question last week was, what's the magic number that we should be looking at? There is no one magic number. In fact, there's a fourth number you should be adding into that, which is your profit margins. You need to look at revenue, cost, profit margins, administrative expenses, and your net profit all the time. Just because you have higher revenue doesn't mean that your net profitability is going to go up. You've got to look at all of these numbers in conjunction and make sure you're analyzing them consistently. Okay. And again, don't just choose one number, choose all of them to investigate. Like I said, when you're looking at your financial management reports, line item by line item should be investigated. The next one is prioritize higher end products. I say that because it's a trend that I'm seeing, but again, I want to just highlight, I'm not a distributor, I'm not a TP, I'm not a marketeer. I just see what consumers in China want. They want the higher end products, the higher end quality products. But at the same time, I say that you should be analyzing the data, and the data, if it's not telling you that, then you have to reevaluate your business, talk with other providers to see what they would recommend. But ultimately, this is what you should be thinking about. I also think that you shouldn't be bringing in 50 different products. You should be doing your research to understand how to bring in your innovative products stage by stage, phase by phase. The next one is capitalize on other people's resources. There are so many brands nowadays that are not even in the same industries or sectors that are utilizing each other to spur innovation to spur curiosity, to spur creativity, which is phenomenal. I forget the example that I just saw yesterday with a media agency's newsletter. Forget the two products, actually, but it's just fascinating. So you might have a cosmetics brand that actually does work with a fast food chain. Don't ask me how that works, but somehow the media strategy works. And they cater off of each other's consumer database. So be open to creativity, be open to the fact of partnering with other brands to build a higher consumer portfolio. And then not spend so much money because you're working together on media projects. You're potentially sharing the costs on those things, but utilize each other. You know what I love? I mean, I've been in Europe now for about 2.5 years, and something that I'm astounded by is that people are so reserved in Europe, so conservative. My brand is my brand. Why should I share my brand with you? In China, companies we all struggle. And we all want to share our war stories. And I think it's fantastic that their companies are utilizing each other for advice, for experience, and then ultimately now for media projects. And because the ultimate goal of everybody in China is to make money. So be open to that mindset of capitalizing on other people's resources. The next is managing your costs, which bothers me. Considering we're an accounting firm, there is not enough benchmarking occurring in China. I'm hoping that it started during the pandemic, but I still don't see it enough. Manage your costs. Understand if you can find a cheaper provider that offers the same quality. Do your benchmarking. Can you find a better lease agreement? Can you find a better media agency? Can you find a better distributor that is not charging you, I don't know, 5% commission on sales? Can you find other providers? Managing your costs is about benchmarking who is out there and understanding the value of money and changing partners consistently. Because ultimately, if you work with one partner, in the end of the day, it's well and good. It doesn't rock the boat, but does it really help you to scale up? Sometimes you need fresh blood within your organization. Sometimes you need fresh partners to give you inspiration and creativity on how to improve. And in many instances, you might find those partners are actually cheaper than who you're using right now. So managing your costs, controlling your costs. Financial controllers are always the enemy. I get it. But they are critical to the organization. And if they're doing their job right, they should be the enemy, because they should be going to the marketing department and saying, you want to spend 500,000 RMB on this marketing campaign? I want to see your return on investment analysis. What is it? You haven't done it, and we need to work on it before I agree on this cost. Oh, an opportunity popped up on the doorstep. You didn't budget for it. Well, we need to evaluate now whether it makes sense to do it. And then what are we going to eliminate from the budget that you've already provided to cater to this opportunity? Financial controllers should be the enemies, and they are critical to managing your costs and helping you to scale up. The next is reviewing your offer. And by offer, I mean your pricing strategy. Are you benchmarking your competitors continuously? Something that's quite easy to do if you're doing cross-border e-commerce. Something that might not be so easy to do if you're using distributors. But my husband is in the food and beverage sector. He's finance. He's the enemy. But you know what he does is, out of his own interest, every time we go to another country, or even in China, if there would be a new supermarket that opened up, he would go in and evaluate the pricing of his competitors, of his own product, to understand what is going on in the market in real time. Are there discounts occurring? Are there promotions that are occurring? What is going on? So he does that from a financial perspective. Your team should be doing that continuously by going on the ground. And if you don't have people on the ground, it should be your partners doing that or assisting you to do that, to evaluate your offer. And how does it compare to your competitors? And what do your consumers say about your offer? The next one is buying more effectively. Now, it all comes down to how your supply chain works. But if you are thinking about your phased approach in China, you should probably have the long-term vision of either manufacturing in China, assembling in China, repackaging in China, doing labeling in China, thinking about how to localize the business, again, to help you with your costs for your supply chain, for your purchasing of your raw materials for your supplier side. You have to think more effectively. Because probably what you're doing now is just shipping direct from your manufacturing site to China. It's expensive. Everything is getting more expensive. So you have to think in the back of your mind, how can you buy more effectively? What can you do that in the long term, this cost goes down? The next is concentrating on your sales efforts. And again, this is where people get lazy because they delegate to distributors, they delegate to TPs, they delegate to sales agents, and they don't necessarily truly evaluate that. I have a client who just recently set up in 2021 because they have a distributor who's actually been doing a fantastic job. Sales has been going up. But what they have realized through their analysis is actually he's very good at selling the lower end and mid-tier product ranges, but horrible at selling the higher end product ranges. And they realized that it's because he does not have the expertise and the knowledge level. So what they're going to do is they've set up their own entity. They're going to expatriate a technical engineer from the UK to China, build a localized team where they then join the distributor on sales meetings, on sales calls to actually help support the higher end products. They're concentrating their sales efforts on the higher end products. Okay. Now, why have they decided to set up their own entity and not just have the distributor? Because eventually they feel like they might exit from this distributor and do everything on their own, right? In the end, you have to also think long term, will we need our distributors? Will we need our TPs, or could we do things all in-house? That's also how you can help to scale up. You've got to expand your market, understand where in China are you selling? Can you move to other regions? Is there opportunities in other regions? Then you have to boost your productivity. Not always so easy to do when you're not on the ground. You have to trust that your team is as productive as they possibly can be. But that comes with implementing incentives like bonus schemes, excuse me, or other such incentives to really attract and boost the productivity within your partners, within your team members, etc. But this is something that should be strived for and try to achieve regardless if you're on the ground or not. So that's the 15 points. And just to finish up, I'm going to give you a short checklist of something you could just do now. Okay, because that's probably extremely overwhelming in terms of looking at your business and analyzing it so in depth. But just to start off with, the first thing that you probably want to do is just evaluate your business overall, right? Are there things that could be improved or made more efficient? Let's just start off with that. Let's look at the different areas of the business as a general overview and come up with maybe 2-3 points that you need to do to improve efficiency and create this Kaizen mindset. Okay, then take action on those 2 to 3 points to improve it. Could be that you have to create operational guidelines. It could be that you need to maybe be having weekly calls with the team on the ground to give direction and advice and help and support. It could be a variety of different things. Then create KPIs. All right. Create KPIs, like I said, for a daily basis or weekly basis to analyze your strengths and your weaknesses and involve your team to be a part of that discussion. Okay. The next is assessing your general business costs. And this is actually something that's really not complicated to do. You've got your cost breakdown. You've got your costs of goods or services, and you've got your administrative costs. I would actually start with administrative costs, looking at every single line item. Can we go to a cheaper provider? Can we go to a provider that offers more value add? What can we do to, again, bring our business to a certain level of efficiency and maybe save money? Then you have to look at your costs of goods or services and analyze there as well. Can we change logistics providers, warehousing providers, whatever it might be, to improve, again, the supply chain efficiency? The next is reviewing areas of business waste and reducing them. So this is comes hand in hand, right? You're assessing your general business costs, but then you're also reviewing areas of business waste. Now I'll give you an example of what I've done. And this is stemmed from the pandemic. I'm using the pandemic as a trend that I have seen, which is I actually don't need to have an office in Shanghai anymore where every single one of my employees has a desk. Because the tendency now has been either they are working from home because of lockdowns, or ultimately they want to be flexible enough where they say 2-3 days a week they work in the office, the other 2-3 days they work from home. And I'm very open to this flexibility. Now, the law does not state that every single employee has to have a workstation in the office. But there is some sort of a threshold that you have to abide by. But what has this meant for me? It means that I've reduced my office space in Shanghai. I'm paying a lot less rent. And I have actually incentivized my staff on productivity, because now, especially the women, they're so happy that they don't have to be in the office full time, and that on 2-3 days they can be at home and also be around their kids and have that flexible working style, which I never even really knew that they wanted, but they do. Now, for those of my staff members that want to be in the office full time because of their living arrangements, not an issue. But it's just been a way for me to be able to cater to everybody and actually save costs. So my business waste was actually reducing my office space down. Okay. The other thing is regularly reviewing the pricing of your products. And again, benchmarking your competitors. This you can do. This is just data research, guys. You've got market research companies that do that. If you've got TPs, the TPs can actually do that work for you from the e-commerce platforms. Check the pricing of your competitors. Understand and review your pricing against theirs. Evaluate what to do next. Do we increase? Do we not increase? Do we provide discounts? Do we not provide discounts? My only thing is, if you then come up with a strategy, test that before you actually completely execute, because you don't want to make mistakes and go wrong. So know that you have the ability to test things out before making them actually fully permanent. Improve your profitability through your best customers. Now, if you are a company that is selling B2B, you have distributors, right? Or B2D, you've got distributors on the ground in China. Let's say you've got 5 distributors, but actually only one is doing an outstanding job and is giving you profitability. Let's not focus on the other 4. Let's focus on that one and see what more we could do with him, because apparently he's motivated, incentivized, and he's doing a good job, and he's got a good connection because he's hitting the KPIs and he's causing you the least amount of trouble. So analyze your customer base and see where your focus should be. And then also analyze, ultimately, does it make more sense? Although I'm earning a little bit from this distributor, he's just a pain in the butt. I'm spending a lot of time. Is it worth it? Don't always evaluate the revenue side of things. Also evaluate whether it's worth your time and effort to work with a provider that's only giving you this much. Or does it make sense to spend that time on the good customer and increase your revenue through that? Identify areas of expenditure and limit these by negotiating with your suppliers. We're living in pandemic times. You can negotiate anything at this moment in time. Everybody is looking to survive in China. And then it's up to the supplier to say, I'm not going to give you a discount, or I am going to give you a discount. Okay, it's completely up to them. But if you don't even make the effort to negotiate, how can you scale up your business in China? Everything in China is about negotiations. That's how you do business there. So if you don't even bother to negotiate for cheaper prices, lower rent, whatever, then how are you going to get ahead? Okay, so start negotiating. Don't be scared to negotiate. If you've got long-term deals with suppliers, which many might do, I'm going to use the leasing agreements as a topic of conversation. If you are renting a warehouse space or you're renting an office space, and actually, you're happy with the location, team members are happy with the location, everything is perfect, then, why not sign a 5-year contract and negotiate that contract where, let's say, you've got 3 years fixed based on current terms, and then there's going to be a fixed increase for the next 2 years. That way, for 5 years, you are very clear on what the terms are for your lease agreement. Helps a lot to make decisions, and you understand then, how much the increases are going to be. And then it helps you evaluate how much you have to make to cater for those increases. If you've got long-term contracts with media agencies or long-term contracts with distributors, also evaluate that, right? And negotiate better. Research. All right, you've got to continuously research your market, your business sector, your industry. Identify where you can expand regionally or by SKU. Understand what is happening day to day in the market. Research should be something that is continuously done. I found a fantastic research company. They're called Bolt Insight. I have no attachment to them. I have nothing to do with them. I just have a client who uses them, and I'm amazed by their technology because they're called Bolt Insight, and they do surveys and questionnaires for consumer trends in different jurisdictions around the world. And they recently did a consumer trend project for a brand where they were able to interview or survey 100,000 people in specific regions that was determined by the brand. And there's an app where you get data as the surveys are coming in. So you're not even going to read a report later on, which I hate reading market research reports and all that. It's an app, you open it up and you see the data. I thought it was fantastic, phenomenal. And you pay purely based on the amount of consumers consumers you want to reach. So I thought it was a fascinating technology. This is where knowledge is power. The more people you know to work with and advise from, the more you'll be able to scale up your business. But you have to be interested in expanding that ecosystem and talking to as many people as possible to build up the business. And then last but not least, if you are finding out through the fact that there are areas of business that need to be improved or have to be efficient, create and monitor system processes. My husband, being in the finance sector for a large company, he says nothing works in our organization without having methodologies and processes. Methodologies and processes are always adaptable and can be flexible, but they are a starting point for our discussions with anybody that we're working with. And they give team members the training they need to understand what they can sell, how they can sell it, what discount prices, without continuously getting approvals. So this is a foundation that everybody should have in place, and they should be continuously monitored and updated. So this is just a little bit of an action plan. It might also seem overwhelming for a lot of you, but I just wanted to break down those 15 action points into something that's maybe a little bit more tangible. So I'm going to finish off today. For those of you that are watching this live, for those of you that are watching this on replay, are you able to focus consistently on your strategy and your growth plans? Or are you doing what happened to me in my first 5 years in China, which was fighting fires and fixing things because they were broken and not properly implemented? Because I didn't have the right foundation. I spent 5 years doing that. What a waste of time. You, as directors, as leaders, you need to continuously say, am I actually only fighting fires? Or am I able truly to focus on strategy and growth? And then pivot and focus on certain areas that need to be fixed. But actually, I've got a team of people that are going to execute that fixing. I don't actually physically have to do it myself. So I'm going to finish off there. That is how to scale your China business, everyone. I just want to touch on a couple of case studies. Now, this is the only brand, and I apologize for the unclarity of the business, but this is one of my clients. I'm allowed to tell you the name of the company. The other three I cannot. Believe has been such a successful organization for me. And I'm very proud of them as well, because they do have the financial resources and they have the human resource capabilities to push their China project, which has now actually become an APAC project as well. They started off by selling one brand, Citrix, which is the orange juice that you see on the screen, in China, extremely successfully. They had a turning point where their local distributor was not able to clearly explain to them why the brand was successful, why they were scaling up, why more product was being purchased. They had no clarity and transparency over the scale, the scaling up, the growth. And they knew that they couldn't sustain this business in China if they didn't have this information at their fingertips. And mind you, they have a portfolio of over 50 different brands that they manufacture. One is Citrix, one is Oka, they've got a water brand, they've got a whole series of coffee brands. And they want to bring in every year 4 to 5 different brands. And their realization was, we got to do this ourselves if we want to have the information and we want to have the data. So they've actually expatriated somebody over, they've set up their structures, they're working with 3, 4 different TPs, they've got a fantastic logistical provider and warehousing provider, they're working with different media agencies, and since January of this year, they have already got 6 people on the ground that are employed by them, both in Hong Kong and China, and the managing director just arrived in Hong Kong. So most expats are leaving, but it's amazing to see actually one brand where somebody is being seconded over in this time of pandemia and all of that. But it's a great success story to show that in 2021, they used that year to build their foundation, to continue to sell, to push on marketing campaigns and KOLs. They then built the structures, and come January 1, they hired people, put them on the ground, and they've been scaling ever since. So just to say, this is a company that has vision. This is a company that has no fear of scaling. This is a company that, yes, has financial and human resource capabilities, but they have complete alignment with the managing directors, which has been fundamental to their success so far, because decisions have been made quickly and they've been able to pivot quickly. The next is a leather accessories brand that I want to highlight. They actually were working with a distributor in Tianjin, an American guy. So actually the relationship was absolutely fantastic, Western minded. It was actually a perfect relationship. But unfortunately, this Western distributor in Tianjin wanted to retire and leave China. So they gave the option to the company to decide, do we look for new distributors or do we do it ourselves? They then did their market research. They did the opportunity analysis, looked at strengths and weaknesses, and they evaluated that setting up on their own, they would be able to scale up much faster. In the meantime, they've got now 5 people on the ground just within the last 2 years. They're actually going to get a Chinese investor to come on board to scale up as well because of the network connections that they have. They've opened up a retail outlet as their flagship showroom, all during a pandemic. And they've been doing very, very well. All right. The only downside to them was they weren't expecting any of this. And when they had their first 11/11 big promotional sales, they didn't have enough inventory on the ground to support it. So it's just to say that sometimes you can even do your research and you don't even have enough inventory to cater to it. So they've also been a great story. The next is a UK company, sells coffee and tea, hot chocolate, biscuits, etc. And they were also working with a fantastic distributor that was more offline. They then also helped create the online presence, but realized this was not their expertise. And so they then hired an expatriate to move over to build up on that. They have since decided to set up their own structure in China to actually scale up, to bring everything in-house, but still utilize them as a distributor for as a fulfillment center of the products, etc. But ownership would be theirs. So also a success story because they are truly scaling up, going on more e-commerce platforms and looking for additional sales channels. And this is a chocolate company out of Europe, where again, they came into China for about 4 years and very happy with the status quo. They then changed managing directors, and this managing director in China had a vision of what to do with the company. Granted, he also had experience in this industry and sector, but he had a vision specific to their product type of what to do and how to change it. So with this company, they went through the strategic innovation route, changed packaging, changed also the consolidation of the products to be able to scale up. And that's exactly what they've done. So I wanted to highlight these 4 case studies because I wanted to show that when you have the right team supporting your China business, you can focus on strategy and growth. And you also have then people who are going to help mitigate the risk. You've got the right people who are going to help you mitigate the risk. And you've got people who've got a vision of what they want to accomplish for the Chinese market. So that's the end of today's presentation. I'm going to just open the chat box to see if there are any questions that have come in. There's no questions that have popped in, but if you guys have any questions, please let me know, right? Happy to support you. Just to finish off today, how you can work with me, we offer a variety of different services from brand advisory. I'm not a marketeer or a media agency, but we do help brand advisory in terms of brand protection advisory. We do trademark searches, trademark registrations, we validate market entry strategies. We offer incorporation services, etc. And then we offer a whole series of administrative services around accounting, tax, payroll, compliance, recruitment of in-house finance people, etc. Right? A question just came in from Doug saying, getting money in and out of the country, any tips? Very funny that you asked me that. I just had a conversation this morning with a company on this topic. So getting money in and out of China. For me, after 18 years, it's a process. It's not complicated because I'm used to it. It's just a process. I think what I would have to advise people is the following. If you're transacting with China and you don't have an entity in China, I would recommend setting up a renminbi account abroad. If you're in the UK, if you're in the US, if you're in Canada, Australia, wherever, you have the ability to open up renminbi accounts and hence invoice in renminbi so that your counterparts in China can pay you in renminbi. Why do I say that this is a tip? Because there's a lack of Forex in China, which can delay payments. In addition to that, it causes less concern for your counterparts in China who transact normally only in renminbi. So it's just something I would recommend to do. What I've seen from the banks overseas, though, is that they don't want you to just open up a renminbi account and just say, hey guys, I've got a renminbi account. They want you to actually use it. So they will check that you are using it. And if you're not, they will close the accounts. So you have to be aware of that aspect. Open the renminbi account if you're actually going to use the renminbi account. The other tip I would say is educate yourself on what it takes a Chinese company to pay you overseas. Understand the process and the document list that has to be submitted to a tax bureau, that has to be submitted to a bank to get the payment out. It's bureaucratic, it takes time. Service agreements have to be, contract service agreements have to be in place. Invoices have to be in place. The only thing I would say on that is make sure you negotiate your contracts correctly, where you yourself as an overseas company have no liability on tax liabilities, surtax liabilities, banking fees, etc. Because in the end of the day, I know that you want to receive your net revenue, your net income. And there are a lot of Chinese companies that may cheat you on that. So they might say, oh, the tax is XYZ, and actually you have no idea if that's true or not. You just follow what they say, and then they say, oh, but you have to pay for it. And So knowledge is power. Understand what the processes are in China to get money out, and understand how all of that works. And then when money comes into China, so for us, for example, when we invoice our clients overseas and we get money, also not easy. Money usually goes into an escrow account. We need to provide supporting documents on the transfer. Once we provide that supporting information, money then flows into our bank account. So very old-fashioned bureaucratic systems. Things are improving. Things are getting easier, but it's still quite old-fashioned, and the banking system is still very old-fashioned. There is online banking and all of that, but inbound, outbound transfers are still complicated. So you just have to be aware of that. I've listed here, if anybody, Doug, I hope that answers your question. It is a big topic. I do have one session that I've just done on that. You can find it on the YouTube channel on how to repatriate funds out of China, if you want to look at that more carefully. If you guys are interested in any of our services, or fundamentally, we're talking about sales into China, I hope you've all registered your trademarks. If you guys need any help with these types of things, let me know. Happy to support you. Also, if you just want to brainstorm a little bit, happy to brainstorm as well. You can email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com, and we can schedule a call together. And just to finish off, because I'm going off on holiday in August, so we've got 3 more sessions this month. We're going to be talking about implementing cross-border e-commerce business models next week. Then we're going to have a guest speaker on who's going to be talking about effective PR in the digital era, do's and don'ts. And then we're going to finish off July with just generally tapping into China's trade opportunity. So understanding the traditional trade routes as well as the more modern trade routes that are available. All of you that have come up live, you're already registered, so just pop in every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central European time. But if you have any clients or colleagues who want to join, you can just get them to register off of our website, and they can participate as well. So I hope that's helped everybody. And again, hope to see you again very soon. Take care, and goodbye. And by the way, we are recording today's session, so if you do want to re-listen to this or forward this to somebody, you'll be getting that at the end of the day today. All right. Take care, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Bye.